It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome our guest, Professor Chantal Mouffe. Thank you for joining us today. Professor Mouffe hardly needs any introduction. She's one of the most esteemed and acclaimed contemporary political thinkers. We are happy to have some of her books translated into Polish, from groundbreaking Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, written with Ernesto Laclau, to the series of books published by Krytyka Polityczna, among them Agonistics, Thinking the World Politically, On the Political, and For a Left, Populizmu. I believe we'll have subtitles to this conversation, so the Polish versions of the titles will appear there. Before we start, we asked the public to send in the questions for Professor Mouffe, and we will include these questions in our conversation. Professor Mouffe, you are known, among other things, for your criticism of liberal associative vision of politics. Today in Poland, the liberal opposition incessantly accuses the ruling Law and Justice Party, Prawo i Sprawiedliwość Party, of having divided the Polish people or Polish nation, and repeatedly calls for restoring the unity. Should we really strive for unity? Could you remind us what the liberal vision of politics is based on, and what is the problem with it?
Well, I think I need to make some little, theoretical introduction in order to answer this question, because basically what we are facing here is two different conceptions of the political. The liberal one and the one I defend. One is, because you say the liberal conception is called the associative conception of politics, while I'll advocate a dissociative conception. The associative conception means that politics is acting in common, is basically try to find a way in which we are all going to agree, and it's the field of liberty, and there is no antagonism. Okay, that's the associative conception. I define another one, which of course is not something that I've created. Is you can see the genealogy of that in Thucydides, in Machiavelli, in Hobbes, in Carl Schmitt, of course, in Weber. So I inscribe myself and already very clear in Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, the book that we wrote with Ernesto Laclau. And in fact, I will always refer to this book because this is where we develop the theoretical, basis of our reflection later. For instance, my book, the last one, for left populism, you can't really understand it if you don't know what we say in Hegemony. Because in Hegemony, we say that there are two main concepts to understand the political. It's antagonism, that is, you inscribe yourself in a dissociative conception according to which the field of politics is the field of conflict. Because there are antagonism. Politics is necessarily partisan. Politics consists, and that's very important for my reflection on populism, in drawing a frontier between the us and the them. And also the other concept is the concept of hegemony. And that also refers to a whole theoretical tradition, which is the discursive tradition, conception of the social. The fact that here we develop a critique of what we call essentialism. The idea that the world is given to us, what Jacques Derrida called the metaphysic of presence. I say, no, the social is always, a discursive inscription. And that's very important in order to understand the possibility of, having different form of a construction of the us and the them. So this, of course, is something that liberal thought, and here again we need to make some distinction because we speak of liberalism, but I want clearly to dissociate what I is, economic liberalism and political liberalism. Because, for instance, I defend I'm very critical of economic liberalism, but I am a defensor of political liberalism. I think the principle of separation of power, rule of law, human rights. This is something that for me is crucial to democracy, to my conception of democracy. Okay, so this I think is important. So when I'm speaking here of liberalism, I'm speaking of political liberalism. For instance, the ideas developed by John Stuart Mill in On Liberty, that kind of tradition. But I think that is quite important in order to understand the different ways in which you can construct the frontier. And I think probably I could go on, giving 1 hour discussion about that. But in this case, with respect to your question, I think that's what is important is to realize that the basic disagreement is not something that it's an ontological difference we've got there. For instance, and of course, it leads to different understanding of democracy, because obviously, for the liberals, and again, I insist, I speak here of liberal in a wide sense of a philosophical and political, no, in a way in which, for instance, people who are on the left or like Habermas, you've got among the liberal Habermas, Rawls. I put also in this associative conception. I also put, for instance, Hannah Arendt in that conception. So the idea that finally the main point there is that is there, put it in philosophical terms, what something like a radical negativity. The negativity that is not simply the negativity that is dialectic, because in Marxism, for instance, and of course, and Hegel, obviously, you've got an idea that there is negativity, but it's a negativity that can be overcome, and that idea of communism, you can arrive to absolute consensus. And well, the dissociative conceptions start from a different conception. They say there is a radical negativity, a negativity that cannot be overcome, and that's what we call antagonism. And also it means, and that's quite important for my revelation, that society is necessarily divided. And this, of course, is what the liberal can't accept. And when they tell you, well, why, can't we agree? Why do you want to polarize? What do you want? They believe that this is something which, in fact, is anti-democratic. While I will argue that what is anti-democratic is precisely to believe that there is a possibility to arrive to some kind of consensus, a situation in which there is no more antagonism. And I think, of course, this is something which, if let's say, one of the main opposition of the liberal to populism is precisely because populism consists in drawing a frontier. Here, maybe it's important at this point to already clarify that when I speak of populism, and here it is something which has been developed by Ernesto Laclau in his book on the populist reason. Populism is a strategy to construct the political frontier between the people and the establishment, the people from above and the people from below. By the way, we already find this in Machiavelli. Machiavelli was speaking of the different umori, il popolo e i grandi. We already got an idea of the society is divided. I think it's very important to see that there are different ways to think about the political, the associative and the dissociative. And according to the one that you choose, you are going to make different kind of reaction. For instance, the associative, they are trying to see, okay, what are the conditions in which we can create consensus? And there you've got different Habermas and roles, and they are different. While in the case of the dissociative conception, there is no idea. The democracy is not the realization of an absolute rational consensus. Is the way in which you are going to accept dissensus, to and recognize that there is dissensus, and to establish the institution through which this dissensus can be put into form, into scene, in a way which is not going to lead to civil war. So I think that's very important. Different conception of democracy.
I must say, I forgive me this personal remark, but I remember that reading your text was like a breath of fresh air. And from my perspective, there's a huge emancipatory potential in a dissociative model you propose, because it makes it possible for the minorities to articulate their claims without striving to fit in, to assimilate. And liberals, I'm afraid, often regard groups of protests as those who endanger social harmony. And in dissociative model, they may make themselves visible. This category of visibility is main topic of this year edition of the festival. So I would also allude to this. So in a dissociative model, the minorities may make themselves visible in an unapologetic way, and their visibility unveils, I think, all the prejudices underlying the consensus that you're criticizing. So my question would be, was the category of emancipation important in your thinking about democracy, about the model of politics?
Well, it is several things I need to answer. Well, first, I'm saying I do agree with what you say, in the sense that, well, basically, the kind of conception of democracy which you derive from the dissociative model is that modern democracy. I don't really like that term for a say yes of reason. We can't enter into that here, but let's say. The pluralist democracy is the recognition, the fact of conflict, and the legitimation of conflict. That's crucial, and that I think that's the point you wanted to raise. That according to a dissociative model, you can legitimate conflict. why the liberal will always see conflict as some kind of, impediment that we need to overcome. So there is really, according to me, no place for a real pluralism in this conception. So this is important. I do believe that, in order to be able to recognize important differences, you need to start from the associative conception. But I will insist, and I'm not, don't know, if you will agree with me on that, or if you, that the dissociative conception is not necessarily something that will lead to defend an emancipatory form of politics. Because some people, in fact, interpreted hegemony in socialist strategy, that if you adopt our theoretical perspective, automatically, it entails that you are defending the project of radical democracy that we were developing in the book. And I think you can perfectly, starting from a dissociative conception, develop, a form of politics which is not at all emancipatory, which is going more into some kind of authoritarian, of course, in the sense that they do not believe that they are going to establish some kind of harmony, but they say, well, we are defending. Well, let's say, if you accept that politics is partisan, well, then you must recognize that, partisan can go into many different directions. To come to your question about emancipatory, well, I must say that I don't really use that term very much. You might have noticed that, the term of emancipation,
Yeah.
because I think that there's some connotation of the term emancipation which I find problematic. A certain idea that a total emancipation is possible. And some people, of course, believe that the idea that precisely you can overcome antagonism, you can overcome relation of power, while for me, relation of power are constitutive of the social. What you can do is construct relation of power which are less unequal, but you can't really, it's unthinkable a society without relation of power. And I think that there is some form of idea of emancipation, a certain way of understanding communism, for instance, overcoming, relation of power. So this is why I know that not necessarily emancipation might have to contact in that way. For instance, Ernesto Laclau has got a book called Emancipations in Plural. So there are different forms of emancipation. There's not the final emancipation. In the same way, for instance, in our work, we also insist that, and here I often make reference to what something like Derrida say, democracy is always to come. We speak of the democracy à venir, in a sense that democracy need always to leave open the possibility of contestation. Because if you imagine that there is a point where you are going to say, okay, democracy has been realized, no. We can't imagine a form of society that will be better. Well, this is a form of totalitarianism, because it means that you have no possibility of contestation. And then, of course, here I might be a bit caricatural, but if you disagree with the actual state of affairs, it's because you are irrational, and then you should be sent to a psychiatric asylum, So I think that it's always important to insist on that democracy can never be absolutely realized. It's a process. It's always to come. So this is why I've got some problem with the idea of emancipation, some understanding of emancipation. On the other side, I mean, it's clear that when we speak, and for instance, this is something which is constant from hegemony till my book on left populism, is that the goal, my political goal is, what I call a radical democracy, a radicalization of democracy. So this how I understand emancipation. For me, the process of emancipation is a process in which we are going to extend and deepen relation of democratic practice in more and more sphere, but always accepting that you are not going to say, okay, this is the limit. No, we can't extend anymore, because this is, I think, really anti-democratic. So my understanding of emancipation is definitively a process of radicalization of democracy. But of course, this is a political position. This is a political project. It's part of the partisan struggle. And I don't believe that necessarily the theoretical perspective that we develop in hegemony needs to live into that direction, because you can have people who within what I call the agonistic struggle, because for me basically if you accept the partisan character of politics and the dissociative approach, it means that politics is always going to be, a struggle between us and them, and with different projects, the possibility for people to really, have to choose a different project. Well, but some of those projects might be projects that you don't like, which are authoritarian, which are, so this is why I think I made this distinction, because there have been some misunderstanding in people reading my work, between what I call the agonistic model of democracy. That agonistic model is, an analytical model, and
Right.
it does not have any axiological dimension. And then within this context of agonistic democracy, then you've got different projects that you are defending. And the project which I'm defending is a project of radicalization of democracy. And this is, of course, also what and we might discuss that in moment, because it relates to some of the question. The aim of left populist strategy is precisely to create the condition for this process of radicalization of democracy.
Mhm. You mentioned the question of you mentioned the concept of irrationality and rationality. Liberals often denounce, I believe, the minoritarian voices of protest as irrational, even hysterical, unwilling to compromise. At the same time, they would defend liberal status quo through moral condemnation of the right-wing populism. You stress the importance of affects in politics. Could you explain what you mean by that? And why is a liberal model of rationality insufficient? And would you agree that this strategy of moral repudiation is an attempt to somehow include affects in liberal political spectrum?
Okay, here again, there are many things that need to be clarified. So let's say, shall I begin by the affects, or what was the first point that you made before
The
moving to
first would
affects?
be if you could just remind us what
Yeah, the
is
model of
your
rationality. Yeah,
stance on the
Okay, no,
on
no,
including affects in the
yeah,
political.
no, but I remember the first part. Yes. Well, I don't really like very much this concept of irrationality, and I will basically often people are accused to be irrational by the liberals simply because they don't disagree with them. They don't agree with them, So if they believe that they've got the truth, that they've got, the certain form of rationality, which I prefer. In fact, I prefer to speak of rationalism. What I criticize in liberalism is not rationality, because and I'm certainly not defending irrationality. I would rather not make this distinction. You know, and for them, there is what I criticize them is rationalism. Rationalism. That is a view according to which every form of problem can have a rational solution. So this is of course why they can't accept the dissociative view, because the dissociative view is precisely to say there are some problems that have no a rational solution. This is precisely what an antagonism is. An antagonism, there is no way. Like, not a question, let's all sit together and agree. No, it's going to put people in conflict. But of course, the liberal don't accept that. So for them, and their point of view, and that's very clear in Habermas, for instance, that we've got all the human beings have got this capacity which is called reason, and if they could in front of any problem, they should get together, use only their reason, and then they will agree. There is a way in which is the ideal speech situation in Habermas. Okay, the question is that obviously and then let's say they are aware of the fact that this empirically is impossible. This is, for instance, why Habermas speak of ideal speech situation, and regulative idea is something to which we try to show, but we will never be able to reach it because, and that's the main difference, there are empirical impediments to reaching that. We will never be able to completely leave aside our particularities. Life is too short and things like that. But ideally, and here, for instance, that's also related to another point which I think is important, is the way in which they understand pluralism. Because, of course, many liberals today will defend pluralism. But for them, it's a pluralism which is basically based on cannot really be realized because of empirical impediments. So let me explain to that a bit better. So the idea is that, of course, there are in the world many different interests and point of view, but from a rational point of view, they could be overcome. And for instance, it means that, of course, as an individual, we will never be able to do that. But imagine somebody from outside our societies, looking at our societies, what is called usually the point of view of serious. Well, that person will see all those different group interests, but they will see also that they constitute, when put together, there is some kind of harmony among them. This is their understanding of pluralism, and this is what I call a pluralism without antagonism. While I believe, and here I follow Max Weber and the politism of value, Nietzsche, the work of God. I say, no, if there is pluralism, there will be antagonism, because not all those points of view can be reconciled. So you see, what I call rationalism is precisely to negate that, to say, no, there's always a way. We should always, in politics, try to occupy this point of view of rationality. And I think that definitively is something which I find extremely problematic, because, again, I want to insist, I'm not against reason, I think that the rationality play a role to play. But here, I think that, and that's for me something which I think is crucial in politics, I follow Spinoza, where Spinoza say that ideas are only really, speak what I know that the phrase in French, idée affectante. It's only when ideas meet affect that they are going to have any impact. You can really have all those good ideas, but if in politics, if you want, to move people, mobilize people, you need. It's not a question of going to teach them, what is correct. You need to try to find a way in which those things are going to resonate with their affects. And this is what that for me is absolutely crucial. And by the way, I think this is one of the main problem of the left in general, because I think that the left is much too rationalistic. They don't really recognize the importance of speaking with, what are the concern of people, not just going to. And I think, for instance, the little anecdote. Quite a long time ago, I met an American Marxist was absolutely convinced that the problem that there was no socialism in the US era was that the workers did not know the Marxist theory of values. You know, it was convinced that if they knew the Marxist theory of value, they will automatically become, socialist Marxist. So, very consequently, he began to organize all over the US school in order to teach the people the Marxist theory of values. Convinced that this was the way we could. I mean, for me, and we had a lot of discussion. I was saying, but this is absurd. This is not how you convince people by there is the science. You need to know the science, and this is really what I found very problematic in the refusal by most of liberal political philosophy, even among the most interesting ones, are completely rationalistic. They believe that if you've got a good reason, then you are going to be able to convince people. And this is, we are going in discussion moment, maybe the success of right-wing populism, but this is, they don't understand that politics is about mobilization of affect. So I think this is for me crucial, and because liberals and much of the left, unfortunately, believe that mobilizing affect is something that only the fascists do. Uh, we are people. We on the left, we only give arguments. Arguments. Everything which is trying to speak to emotion. No, 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 no. This is not good. I think it's an incredible handicap for the left. This
That's
incapacity
the
to recognize the importance of mobilizing affects.
that's the best moment to include first of our audience of our public questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So while we are talking about the weakness of the left, the first question of the public would be Anna asks, what do you think about the postulate that left should focus or give priority to economic issues instead of defending women's rights or LGBT rights? Would it be a right choice for the left populism and the chance for the left to restore its, Anna uses the word, credibility? It's we are diverging a little bit from the question of affects, but maybe we can develop on that. So the question is, should the left concentrate on the economic issues instead of defending women's rights, LGBT plus rights, and so on?
Well, look, that is absolutely contrary to what is the project of left populism, because I think that precisely what is at the core of left populism is the need to articulate the demand of the working class with the demand of new social movement, LGBT, feminist, anti-racist. This is the very center of left populism. So I will not, if you want to eliminate all those more in French societal demands, then you are not a left populist. Then you are a tradition. We might be a traditional Marxist or a traditional socialist, but this is not. No, because maybe we need to clarify something about left populism that we've not really spoken about. So, left populism consists. Let's start from the beginning. As I say already, populism in general, right or left, is a strategy of construction of a frontier. The us, the them. So this is why populism is necessarily anti-establishment. All right, that's the first point. But of course, within that, if you follow the anti-essentialist perspective, the idea that the socialist discursively constructed, this frontier, so the frontier between, let's put people and oligarchy, people and the establishment, okay. But the people is not the population. The people is a constructed political category. It's something which is, and it's not a sociological category. It's not that the people is there and I'm going to represent. No, the people is, we construct who is part of the people. And there is where there can be a difference between left populism and right populism. Because left populism is going to construct a people that includes the minorities, includes the immigrants, includes all those things, while right-wing populism precisely is postulated on not that. Just to give you an example from France, the way in which Marine Le Pen constructs the people is completely different of the way in which Jean-Luc Mélenchon constructs the people. And of course, also the Dem is completely different, because the Dem for Marine Le Pen is the immigrants, while for Jean-Luc Mélenchon it's the forces of neoliberalism, the pension fund, the hedge fund. You see, so this is why I insist, if you don't locate yourself in an anti-essentialist perspective, you can't understand that. You believe that, okay, so the people is there, and the so I think that that's very important. So to come back to your question, the very definition of a left populist strategy is to construct a people that includes not only the people, the working class, and a form, let's say, capitalist exploitation, but also all the resistances, a struggle against discrimination, against all the. I mean, I don't really like this term very much, but it gives you an idea, because it has been Axel Honneth and Nancy Fraser some point wrote a book about the question of redistribution or recognition. This is, I think, basically redistribution has got to do with the question of economic and recognition. And I don't like those terms, but basically, and in fact, already in 1995 in Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, this was our main argument. What we were saying is that we need to reformulate the project of the left, reformulate the idea of socialism, so that it includes not only the working class, of course, but also all those new social movements. Already at that moment, you had feminism and anti-racism. So this is we use a term, we say we need to construct a chain of equivalence among those different struggles. So this is the center. Of course, in hegemony, we didn't speak of, we don't use the term populism, but basically the strategy of left populism was already present in hegemony and socialist strategy. So I would say, for me, it makes absolutely no sense to speak of a left populist strategy that will be centered only on the demand of the working class.
Thank you. And now we are coming to the inevitable. What are the reasons of the success of right-wing populism, which it seems, at least for now, proved to be the political force capable of breaking neoliberal hegemony? So what do you think, why they succeeded in doing that?
Well, first, I don't think they've really managed to break neoliberal hegemony. I mean, there will be a lot of things to discuss about that. But in any case, that's not the center of the question. Well, I think that I've already, in a sense, not completely answered, but indicated. I think that because, unfortunately, I will say, they understand much better what politics is about, the fact of constructing a frontier. Remember that we come from a period, well, of course, the situation in Poland is different, and you've got a different, historical strategy for the years of communism. But basically, in the last 30 years in Western Europe, we've been having some kind of consensus at the center, the idea that there was no difference between left and right, the idea that there was no more antagonism. I mean, this began, of course, with the third way of Anthony
Blair.
Blair, theorized by Anthony Giddens, and in Germany by the Neue Mitte of Schröder, theorized by Ulrich Beck. So for instance, I remember, because it struck me, Blair was saying, well, we are all middle class now, why should there be any, we should all be able to agree. Um, and of course there is, and this is what in my book on the political, I've called the post-political conception. There is no, so in fact there was no possibility for politics, because politics is partisan, is having a choice. And I think that, but what in fact my argument with respect to the success of what I call for the populist moment is the time when we are beginning to see a series of resistances towards what I call the post-democracy, which has been established by this social liberalism. Okay, this post-democracy consists in two aspects. Let's say one political, which is, of course, what I've just called post-politics. The idea that, for instance, when citizens go to vote, well, they don't really have a choice, because there is no fundamental difference between the program of the center left and center right. But there is a phrase on the indignados in Spain which I really like, because they used to say tenemos voto pero no tenemos voz. We've got a vote but we don't have a voice, because if you can vote but for the, so I think that that's one of the aspects of what I call post-democracy. Of course, it's a consequence of neoliberalism and neoliberal hegemony. Yeah? And then, of course, but this is something that began to develop more recently, particularly after the 2008 crisis and the politics of austerity, what I call the oligarchization of our societies, in the sense that, and that is clear break with the post-Keynesian policies, not post-Keynesian, Keynesian policies of the post-democratic, post-war welfare state, because there were, of course, inequalities there, but there was nothing so I think that today the inequalities are really obscene. The difference between some people very, very, very rich, and then the rest of the population, which is, of course, the condition of the workers, they become worse, but then you've got pauperization and proletarization of the middle class. So this is what I think we can really speak of our society becoming oligarchic. That was not the case before, and this is so this phenomenon of post-democracy, oligarchization and post-politics explain the populist moment, because at some point people are just beginning to have resistances against that. To say we want to have a voice, and we want, but those resistances can be expressed in ways which are going to lead to a restriction of democracy, and this is left right-wing populism, because, for instance, I mean, and again, it's very clear what they discourse. They are saying we want to reestablish popular sovereignty, but only, of course, for the national. For instance, Marine Le Pen is, to some respect, she was much more advanced than François Hollande and the socialists in terms of redistributive measure, in terms of going to well, better the life of the working class. Definitively, she was defending the welfare state in a way, but only for the French. Only for the French, not the
There's the
immigrants.
same situation in Poland. Yeah.
Something similar in Poland, don't we? Yes, I think
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
very difficult. Yeah. So, or of course, you can have resistances against that, but in a way which is going to say, no, we need to reestablish democracy, but in order to deepen it and to radicalize it. And that, of course, is the project of left populism, But what
Mm.
there is in common is to say, no, the basic problem with our societies is economic inequality and all the form of inequality, and also the fact that what I call, abandon of popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty here, I want to insist, I use it in a very, very ordinary way, because there is a lot of discussion about sovereignty in political theory. But basically, in the sense, and this is why I was making reference to this phrase of the indignados, we want a voice to be able, to express, to be listened to,
Mhm.
to have
Mhm.
a possibility to intervene, to have a choice. This is what I understand by popular sovereignty in a very, ordinary way. Um, well, to come back to your question, um, it's true that right-wing populism has been more successful in articulating precisely those resistances against post-democracy, because those resistances against post-democracy uh, uh, can be articulated in ways which are going to restrict democracy, or way which are going to extend it, depending. Why have the right populism been more successful? Well, I think in part it's the causes is force of the left. The left has not really been able to well, because you see like here again, I'm speaking basically of Western Europe, and there I would not know if this is pertinent for Poland, but still very recently, I mean, the left in Western Europe was totally third way. They will not at all wanting to construct a frontier. Let's say they accepted neoliberalism, and they contributed enormously too. They were complicit with the installment of neoliberalism. So it was difficult for them, of course, and it's only recently that we've seen the development of left populism, the way in which there is a serious putting into question of neoliberalism, but from the point of view of constructing a populist frontier. Because I think that at the moment, in most of the Western Europe, I mean, let's put it in more concrete terms. Social democratic parties, in Europe, in Western Europe, have been absolutely complicit and part of this process of neoliberalism, oligarchization, and of course, this is why they've not been able to propose a rupture with neoliberalism. From that point of view, I think that the right populists have been better to understand the situation. And of course, I think that, and this it's more, uh, by the way, I've always been interested in conservative thinkers. Because I think that, and for instance, of course, a reference to Carl Schmitt in my work, but also to Michael Oakeshott, and because I find in those reflections they are usually much less rationalist. This is what I find. The left is much more rationalist, because no, we defend the Enlightenment, we defend let's say this question of rationalism is kind of part of their identity. So it's very difficult for them to realize, the consequence of that, the fact of not mobilizing affect. And it is something which is begun to develop. I mean, for instance, clearly Podemos, of course, those people have been very influenced by our work, so it's not surprising then. But the recognition of the effect. Syriza, and all those left populist movements is because they began to put into question this rationalism and think of a politics that will be, really more, you know, more space for the affect. So this
Right.
is for me, and let's say, of course, maybe. Uh, Obviously, let's say it's always easier for the right, um, but that depends from different countries, obviously. But I think that the forces, let's say the forces of the establishment. I don't know if it's true everywhere, but at least in Western Europe, I've seen that, for instance, in France. Uh, they are much more afraid from Jean-Luc Mélenchon and from the possibility of a left populist turn than with Marine Le Pen, because they really believe that they can more or less accommodate, the resistance from right-wing populists. And so there, for instance, it was very clear that the way in which the press, and the press, of course, in France is completely dominated by those, neoliberals, was always trying to destroy Mélenchon. They were much more lenient with respect to Marine Le Pen. That was really incredible. So I think, so this, let's say, the economic interest and the role of the elites, of course, have got a certain role to play, because I think they see more and danger by a left populist project than a right-wing populism. So I think that's also something to. But I don't really know if, in what sense that will be pertinent for Poland. Um,
To some extent, I believe yes. But before we go back to Indignados and also to Podemos and Syriza, and I would like us to conclude with that. There's one question I have to ask you. You oppose very strongly the overuse of the term fascism with respect to contemporary right-wing populism. Could you explain us why? And
yeah.
are there any conditions under which you would qualify at least some of these movements as fascists?
Okay. Well, I of course it depends on, again, how you define fascism. Because obviously, if you define fascism in the way in which Deleuze and Guattari define fascism, that's completely different, because for them, in fact, fascism is everywhere. It's inherent in politics, it's inherent in the. Um, and they say fascism is not a regime, it's got to do with the power, with the will to power. Well, I really, when I use the term fascism, I use the term fascism in the way in which it's considered is a certain type of regime which existed in Western Europe, in a particular time. Because of course, if you start from basically, I honestly don't find the understanding of the Deleuze and Guattari useful at all. I think basically what they are referring to is things which were not called fascism. It's uh, the importance of the dead drive in Freud, for instance, or when Adorno speak of authoritarian, they are, yeah, trait of character, of which are, of course, mobilized by those certain form of politics. But then, of course, they didn't say, fascism is everywhere. It's in liberalism, it is in politics, necessarily has got a fascist element, because it has got to do with power. So I don't find that useful. I think it's better to keep the strict, term. And in fact, for another reason, which I think is more relevant, is the fact that the way in which people, and it's very, very common, of course, in Western Europe, attack right-wing populism and saying those are fascists is because they don't use at all the Deleuze Guattari conception. They simply want to say this is a return of the Brown Plague, the kind of politics which existed a certain type in a certain moment. Is a return of that. And it's something, and this is why I find that very, very problematic. It's like a phenomenon of the weather, It's like coming back because they don't try at all to analyze the reason for the success of those movements. It's more like, cataclysm that suddenly comes back, and of course, what can you do in something like that? No, they don't have a strategy at all. You establish a cordon sanitaire, but there is no way in which, because if it's something which is like an irrational, then how can you struggle against that?
Mhm.
But here there is something which I think is very important for me. Is the fact that it's very convenient for particularly the Social Democrats to adopt this attitude instead of trying to analyze, why is it that so important sector of the working class now are voting for Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen is the most of the vote of the workers in France go to Marine Le Pen. Why is that? I know it's suddenly those people are. It is. For instance, Macron was speaking of in terms of fléau, plague. Suddenly, like that, boof, like the coronavirus suddenly attacks you. Uh, um, but because it's very convenient because they don't have to make some kind of analysis and autocritique. Because again, my point is that I think in great part the success of right-wing populism is due to the Social Democrats' politics. And of course, they don't want to recognize that. And it's much easier to say, is this return of the Brown Plague. So I think that by calling that fascism is a way to avoid making a real analysis of the reason for the success of those parties and the responsibility of the left in that. For me, is extremely important. That's the first point. Second point, and that's, let's say, the most important point, but I also feel that because uh, they call that fascism, but they call that also extreme right. For instance, I've got a lot of people they agree with me in France because I insist on calling Marine Le Pen as a right-wing populist movement. It's not extreme right because extreme right, again, if one is a bit consistent, extreme right is a tradition of politics which is anti-representative democracy, which is we want to put an end to representative democracy. But this is not, and of course there existed, not that long ago, movement like that in France, but this is not at all the case of Marine Le Pen. And most of the right-wing populist movement today are, the objective is not to destroy radical representative democracy, is to arrive in power in those countries. And of course, they are going to have policies which are restrictive, but some people say, but wait a moment, when they arrive to power, they are going to destroy democracy. Remember what Hitler said? Hitler also came to power legally. Well, I think that's, complotism. Honestly, I don't believe that. I don't think that in Western Europe of any uh, of those right-wing populist movement that would really want to destroy representative democracy. Okay, so for that, so I don't think that's why I don't want to call that extreme right. And also, I think because for me, right-wing populism is a new category. It's not something that you can because before that you had parties of the extreme right, you had parties of fascist parties, but those categories are not adequate to our current situation. We need to understand, because I think that uh, the, the fact that there are resistances against post-democracy is very important to understand, and particularly when you are developing a strategy or to counter them. You need to understand it differently. So this is why I think that it's really important to understand the specificity of those parties. And here I want to insist, because I know that is something which is relevant for people like you. They are, I mean, for me, I don't think it makes sense to call Orban a right-wing populist. Uh, there are other. This is the regime of is nationalist, is authoritarian, it's conservative, but I don't really see what would be the populist element. I mean, and that's the difference with Poland, because in Poland, clearly, there are aspects of, trying to win I don't see that of course, I'm not a specialist of Hungarian politics, but I've discussed that with several people we also recognize, but the problem, is not today, populists have just become an insult. Every thing that you don't agree with is populist. It's just there is an inflation of the term populism, which sometimes I say, oh my God, I wish I had not used that, because no, it doesn't make any sense anymore. So everybody is populist. Your question about, are there form of, well, again, that precisely goes to my, I will not, for me, a movement which is sometimes called right-wing populist, and which I will not agree that I will call that fascist, is Bolsonaro in Brazil. For me, Bolsonaro is definitively a proto-fascist, because there is clearly, he would like to reestablish a dictatorship, violence. So this is, I think, for instance, it's a mistake. Bolsonaro is not a Trump of the or the exotic Trump, as they so call it, of the tropics. So, no, Bolsonaro is much worse than Trump, much worse. I mean, Bolsonaro really would like to finish with. So, yeah, the only case where I think that definitively the term fascist, could be relevant is the term of Bolsonaro. But as I say, I will restrict the term right-wing populism to, for me, a lot of things which are called right-wing populism. I don't see the I think more, for instance, and I know this is something which is not accepted by everybody. I think the category of a liberal democracy, for me, makes sense. For instance, I think that it applies to Orban. Of course, there are a lot of people who say, oh, but it's an oxymoron, illiberal democracy. Well, I mean, again, I don't think we've got time to go into that, but in my work, particularly the democratic paradox, I have insisted that our Western model of democracy is an articulation between two traditions, the liberal and the democratic, But those are articulated, there is not a necessarily link. You can have regimes which are liberal and not democratic, and regimes which are democratic and not liberal. So I think, but there is some kind of laziness in all that, is a populist. So I think we need to be a bit more, precise in the way in which we use those categories, particularly if what your interest, and this is basically my interest, because as I said at the beginning of for a left populism, this is a political intervention. I say I'm not interested in writing another book on populism. This is not my what I want to do is to try to understand this phenomenon in order to know what we can do, because I think that there is a real danger of having, in reaction to we are in a crisis of neoliberalism. This crisis can open the way to different relations. For instance, here I would like to make reference also to the work of Karl Polanyi, because Karl Polanyi is very interesting for us. In The Great Transformation, written in 1945, reflecting on what happened in the beginning of the last century, the rise of fascism, Nazism, and he speak of and I find that idea really interesting, a counter movement. So there was a counter movement to the first globalization, the way in which the first advance of liberal politics, which is trying to um, you know commercialize enter the market in all layers of social life. And then at some point, society, the moment of defense of society against this. But this movement of defense, and he called that a counter movement, uh, took very different form. In the US, it led to the New Deal of FDR, so it was a progressive reaction, but it also led to fascism, Nazism, and Stalinism. So, and I think that we are today in an analogous situation. We are in resistance of the. We are seeing a counter movement to neoliberalism, but this counter movement can take different direction. And what I'm really concerned about is that we need to have a strategy to impede this counter movement to take the direction of, the right-wing populist direction, which is. So this is why I think it's important. It's not a question of theorizing about populism. Just to try to understand the conjuncture and have
Right.
tools, theoretical tools to help us understand the conjuncture. And I think that for me the category of right wing populism should be that, because then of course if you understand what is the reason for which important sector of the working class vote for Marine Le Pen in France, then you can envisage, okay, what is the way in which we can react against that.
That brings us to our conclusion, which will be another question from the public. You speak very warmly and you seem to have some hope in the parties like Syriza or Podemos. Anna considers the attempts of Syriza, Podemos, or Jeremy Corbyn's Labour a failure, and asks whether you still believe that populist moment is a chance for the left to redefine the mainstream. You partly answered this question, but maybe you could develop a bit more on these attempts to formulate the left populism in this form of the political party. We have these three examples: Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, and Jeremy Corbyn's Labour in the UK. And my follow-up to this question would be, shouldn't we rather, or shouldn't the left look rather for the alternatives to state politics? Shouldn't it focus on building political movements without representation? It is there is this idea that is always present on the left of the politics without the form of state, of the politics without representation. For example, the politics embodied in the workers' councils. So shouldn't we rather use this as an inspiration to conceive a new form of politics than to try to find a way to redefine the politics as you define it?
Okay, again, I mean, I don't know how much time we've got left, because there are many
Not much,
points.
unfortunately, but a bit.
Okay. So let's try to see first the question. Well, I don't. I will never say that populist movement is a chance for the left. It's a challenge for the left. It's not. It's a moment in which, it's a challenge. It's not a challenge, and of course it can be, going. It can be the possibility to break with neoliberalism in progressive direction, but it also, can be in a more authoritarian direction. So this is why I'm saying the whole question is which of the form of populism, right wing or left wing, is going to be able to articulate the resistances against neoliberal globalization. So and it's something that it's crucial for me. Okay. um, let's see the three cases. Well, Syriza, there are three very different cases, and you can't just put all that, I know recently people have said, in fact, was an article in the journal Jacobin saying, well, left populists fail. No, it's time to go back to real politics, which is class politics, Okay. And of course, I disagree with that because I don't think that class politics will have much more chance, today. Uh, uh, um, and particularly, but of course, the question that you posed before about I know that there are some people who believe let's forget about LGBT and all those things and concentrate on class politics and this. I don't think that it's at all the direction, But okay, uh, 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 examine the case of Syriza. Well, the strategy worked because they arrived to power. Syriza is incredible. The way in which they were able to articulate all those resistances. The problem is that once they arrive in power, they were not able to put their program of anti-austerity into practice. But that is due to the European Union. The European Union really, there was what I call a financial coup. No, they impeded them. So I think that there the question that the experience of Syriza shows, and it's a serious question. Is it possible, to develop this strategy within the European Union? Or does it mean breaking with the European Union? And of course, this is a big debate among left populists. For instance, several left populists, and of course right populists too, are saying no, we need to break with the European Union. I mean, we can't enter into that, but this is, let's say, for me, the question of Syriza posed that question. The question of Podemos, Podemos is in government, in coalition, so they did not do so badly. Of course, it was not what they thought at the beginning, but and Jeremy Corbyn, there are many in the campaign that was clearly populist was the campaign of 2017. Where really they were very near to coming to power. And now, in fact, I don't know if you are aware of that in Poland, but there is a very incredible fight inside the Labour Party because they've just discovered that they were among the people were controlling the party because here I should explain the problem of Corbyn is that in fact he was at that time in a minority in the parliamentary party because the Blairite, were still the dominant force in the party. So the Blairite, in fact, did absolutely everything they could in order to impede the victory of Corbyn. We know there are proof of that. They would rather have a victory of the Tory than Corbyn governance. So they really did a lot of things in 2017 to impede them to win. So this is the so I think that you can't say that it's a failure because of you need to examine what is the situation. But basically, I think the one of the problem or the mistake made by the people who are saying it's failed. No, is because they and by the way, I think that at least Pablo Iglesias was in certain part a little bit responsible for that when he was speaking of el asalto al cielo, the assault to the sky because here we need to understand, and that's another important thing for me in left populism, and this is why I think it's a strategy of radical reformism. Is not the conceive on the model of Leninist revolution, the storming of the Winter Palace, and I think that when Pablo Iglesias was speaking of the asalto al cielo, people understood that, storming, we are going to come. Well, of course, this did not happen. But I think that this was never, I mean, not at least in my understanding of left populism, is not a Leninist strategy of storming of the. It's a strategy of what Gramsci called a war of position. It's a strategy of an hegemonic strategy in which you go is not puff coming. You go and construct an hegemony. So that takes time. It takes time. So the fact that they have not yet managed is, you can't just say, okay, the strategy is wrong. Let's go back to the traditional left strategy. This is so. I think that that's quite important to understand left populism in terms not of a war of maneuver, the storming of the Winter Palace, but in terms of a war of position. Understanding that, this is something which is going to take time, and as Max Weber was saying, politics is a slow boring of our boat. It is something that you need. So I think that that's quite important. Uh, and of course, it takes me to the second aspect of your question, which is okay, because what you are saying, in a sense, well, what you are not saying, let's go back to traditional class politics, which is what is. But you are saying, well, let's abandon this kind of strategy and let's go for a more horizontalist type of politics, a different. Well, here they will have much to say. And in fact, in agonistic, I've got a whole chapter where I'm criticizing this strategy, opposing what I call the strategy of desertion, of exodus, which is the strategy of Virno that we quote, and the strategy of engagement with. So definitively, for me, left populism is a strategy of engagement with the institution, because I think that I don't see the state as monolithic or as the Marxist. The state is the crystallization of relation of power. It can be transformed and so. And let's say, I mean, fortunately, it's not that I don't believe that those kind of molecular or horizontal are not important. Of course, they are important, but they need to be articulated with some kind of more traditional representative politics. This is for me crucial. I believe that there are two strategies which are wrong. It's the one that purely representative. We need to go to power, come to power through traditional party selection. No. And the other one is, let's forget about the state. Let's just what they call the auto-organization of the multitude. Well, I don't think we've never seen that making success anywhere. And in fact, the movement which have more or less follow that strategy, which is, for instance, the Occupy Wall Street, Nuit debout in France, or the Indignados in Spain. They've not, they were extremely vital at the moment, but then at some point, they declined. And in fact, in the case of Spain, it's quite interesting, the case of Spain, because it's at the moment, of course, they recognize, because I wrote a book with Inigo Errigon, what was the moment the number 2 of Podemos, and Inigo say, of course, we will not have existed without the Indignados, because the Indignados created, the terrain. He said, but on the other side, if it had not been for Podemos, the Indignados would have been left absolutely no real impact, because after those 3 months of agitation in the Plaza del Sol, of course, people at some point began to go back home, and then there were a national election, and for the first time in many, many years, the right, the PP, won with an absolute majority. After all this, and then there's a moment in which Podemos said, no, we need to intervene. We can't just leave all that. And they decided we need to engage with the institution, So I believe that this is, I don't honestly believe that in the self-organization of the all those movements are very important, but they need and that's also something another characteristic of left populism. It's an articulation of let's say grassroots movement and more traditional form of politics, electoral politics. There is I call that the articulation of the horizontal with the vertical. Those two areas are for me important. If you really want to transform society, and by the way, it would have been there is quite an interesting experience in that direction in Spain, because the experience of Ada Colau and Barcelona en Comú in Barcelona, they began basically as being very, very horizontalist. And then they began to realize in their fight. I know that because I wrote the preface for a book of one of those, Mauricio Marcelo Esposito. Who explained their experience. Marcelo was, I must say, it's an old friend of mine, and we always had the agreement because he was totally autonomista, totally autonomista. And I remember when I heard that he had joined, well, not Podemos, the Barcelona en Comú, and at that moment, oh my God, Marcelo, but he's now entering into traditional politics. And in fact, he was elected MP for Barcelona en Comú. And in the book that I wrote, the preface, to explain how it is through their very exercise of things that they began to see the importance of entering the institution. For instance, they explained how it was a completely horizontalist movement that began to organize the citizen there. For instance, there is something very, very well known in which Ada Colau was the leader, was called the movement to the defense of the hypothecas, the PAU. But they began to realize, okay, but in order to go further, we need to get power in the city of Barcelona. Okay, so they enter into that kind of politics. And then they began to realize, well, but in order to we need to also try to enter into the Cortes, the government. So it's quite an interesting evolution, because somebody was totally horizontalist, autonomista, and through its engagement began to realize, no, but we need, we need to fight at the level of the state. So this is, why I feel that the strategy of engagement with is the only one that can work. And the last point, about you say politics without representation. But you gave me example of the Soviets, but those are form of representation. I think the problem is that people tend to understand representation only in terms of parliamentary representation. And they say, but no, there are many by the way, I would say, but that again is something that comes from the anti-essentialist position. There is no politics without representation. And for instance, and I'm going to answer, a good friend of mine are defending the idea of what they call a presentist politics. A politics without, they say, for instance, that representative democracy is an oxymoron. You can't have representative democracy. What I'm saying is that you can't have democracy without representation, because in fact, if you start from an anti-essentialist perspective in which identities are not there, but they are constructed, well, the construction of identities is a process of representation. So to imagine politics without representation doesn't make sense, because you don't have politics. We need to have representation. But of course, that doesn't mean that it needs to be the traditional form of representation, like we know in MPs. And of course, I mean, I believe that this is a level which is important. But for instance, in my conception of radicalization of democracy, we need to have a multiplicity of democratic forms, the more traditional form, but also, for instance, some form of participatory democracy, some form of direct democracy in some cases. I don't believe that one can organize a whole society in terms of direct democracy, but some form are important. And even I believe that, sortition, tirage au sort, can be. So the process of radicalizing democracy is also the process of pluralizing the different form of democracy. But they are all form of representation. There's no politics without representation.
Thank you so much, Professor Mouffe. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it was amazingly interesting, and I believe we could talk and talk for hours, but we'll leave it there. Thank you once again for joining us today. It was really a pleasure and an honor. Thank you to all who are listening and watching us, and I hope we'll manage to meet again sooner or later.
Yes, well, it was a real pleasure to have this conversation with you, and also, I'm grateful for the invitation, and I say hello to all the people in Poland and maybe in other places we've been listening to or will be listening, because when is that going to be? It was not direct, no?
No,
It is.
no,
This
it
is
will be published, I believe, on September.
in September. Okay. Well, so can you make sure that they send me the link so that I can see? Yeah.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
Thank you
Okay.
very
Bye
much
bye.
again.
Thank you
Bye
very much.
bye. Thank
Good.
you. Bye bye.